Midnight screams. On the outskirts of the town, deep within a dense forest, stood an abandoned mansion that no one dared to enter. Years ago, the family who lived there vanished without a trace, and rumors of a curse began to circulate. It was said that anyone who entered the mansion past midnight would hear strange sounds and never return. These stories intrigued four university friends, Deniz, Arda, Selin, and Cem, who decided to explore the mansion one stormy night, armed only with flashlights. Deniz pushed open the rusty door, which groaned loudly as if warning them not to enter. The entrance hall was dark and silent, filled with the stench of decay and damp wood. The mansion's walls bore the scars of time, and the ceiling beams looked as though they might collapse at any moment. "Let's go," Selin whispered, though the hesitation in her voice was obvious. Arda swept his flashlight across the hallway and smirked. "It's just an old wreck," he said, but his confidence faltered when a faint whisper echoed through the air. The sound seemed to come from the attic. Cem pointed his flashlight upward, saying, "It's probably just the wind." But the tone of the whisper, somewhere between a groan and a hiss, felt far too unnatural. Fighting the unease that crept over them, they climbed the creaking staircase toward the attic. When they reached the top, they were greeted by suffocating darkness and an eerie chill. Deniz called out, "Is anyone there?" The only response was a low, guttural laugh that seemed to come from everywhere at once. As they explored the attic, they found strange symbols drawn on the floor and an old book lying in the middle of the room. The book's cover was nearly destroyed, and its pages were charred at the edges. "This looks like some kind of ritual book," Selin murmured as she picked it up. The moment she opened it, the attic silence was shattered by a deafening scream. The sound was so piercing that they all covered their ears. Shadows on the walls began to move as though alive. A shadowy figure emerged from the corner of the attic, its grotesque form barely resembling a human. Its limbs were elongated, its eyes completely white, and a dark liquid dripped from its gaping mouth. "We have to get out of here," Deniz shouted as he ran toward the staircase. But when he reached the door, he found it locked. The shadows grew larger and surrounded the group, pushing them into a corner. Selin, staring at the symbols on the walls, yelled, "These symbols are some kind of seal. Maybe if we destroy them, we can escape." Arda and Cem frantically tried to erase the symbols, but every time they touched them, the marks reappeared. The shadow lunged at Selin, engulfing her in darkness. Her screams echoed through the attic before they abruptly stopped. Deniz, panicking, kept pulling at the door, while Cem tried to fend off the shadow. The creature turned its attention to Cem, wrapping its skeletal arms around him and dragging him into the void. His cries faded into silence. With only Deniz and Arda remaining, they turned to a small window at the far end of the attic. They ran toward it, hoping it might be their only chance to escape. But when they reached it, they saw that the window was covered with rusted iron bars. The shadows closed in, and Arda hurled his flashlight at the creature. The light struck it, causing the shadow to hesitate momentarily. Taking advantage of the brief pause, Deniz and Arda rushed back to the door. Deniz managed to unlock the chains just as Arda was seized by the creature's claws. His final scream pierced the air before the door burst open. Deniz stumbled out into the forest, running as fast as his legs could carry him. The whispers followed him, weaving through the trees like a relentless predator. When he finally reached the edge of the forest, he collapsed to his knees, shaking with fear. But even as he looked back, he felt the unseen presence of the shadows watching him from the darkness. The next day, the townsfolk learned of the disappearance of Deniz's three friends. The mansion, however, remained eerily quiet. That night, the sound of screams echoed from within the house, chilling everyone who heard them. And those brave or foolish enough to follow the screams would find themselves lost to the shadows, just like the others before them. Deniz couldn't fully explain what had happened when she returned to the village. When she told them her friends were missing, no one believed her. The legend of the mansion awakened the villagers' deep fears, but Deniz's story sounded insane. People thought she had lost her mind. In her solitary days, Deniz couldn't shake off the screams of her friends and the whispers she had heard in the mansion. At night, she constantly saw Salen, Arda, and Chem in her dreams. These visions weren't mere nightmares. It felt like they were trying to tell her something. One night, she saw Selen in a dark room in her dream. Selen whispered, "Save us." Deniz woke up abruptly, with a thought forming in her mind. There had to be a way to save them. She decided that the answers could only be found back in the mansion. She remembered the old book they had found in the attic. Deniz felt the book was the key to the curse. If she could retrieve it and decipher its secrets, she believed she could bring her friends back. But that meant returning to the terrifying place once more. At midnight, she grabbed a flashlight, a knife, and a rope, then headed into the forest. As she approached the mansion, her fear grew, but the determination to save her friends pushed her forward. When she arrived at the mansion, she noticed the door was slightly ajar. As Deniz stepped inside, she felt that the atmosphere had changed. The darkness was heavier, and the silence was more threatening. She climbed the stairs to the attic and found the book lying where they had left it. This time, the symbols on the book glowed faintly. When she picked up the book, the pages began turning on their own. The book described a passage in the basement and explained that her friends' souls could be saved through it. However, it also stated that an ancient ritual was required to open the passage. Deniz studied the book carefully to understand what she had to do. Finding the stairs to the basement wasn't easy. As she wandered through the corridors, Deniz felt the mansion was trying to hinder her path. At last, she came to a stone door. When she pushed it open, she found a large room with an altar and shadows circling around it. The shadows began to form silhouettes of her friends. Deniz read through the book to learn the details of the ritual. The first step was to complete the symbols on the altar. As she etched the shapes from the book onto the altar, the room grew darker, and the shadows became more defined. The second step required her to spill blood onto the altar. Deniz lightly cut her wrist and let a few drops of blood fall onto the altar. The blood merged with the symbols, causing a burst of light to radiate through the room. The shadows stirred, and her friends' silhouettes became clearer. As she watched hopefully, a new page of the book revealed itself. It stated that another sacrifice was needed. While Deniz tried to make sense of these words, the dark shadow near the altar moved toward her. When the shadow touched her, Deniz felt an immense loss of energy. It was as if the shadow was pulling a piece of her soul. She realized she was growing weaker, but she refused to stop. The ritual was nearly complete, and saving her friends was all that mattered. The symbols on the altar lit up one last time, and her friends' silhouettes became fully visible. Seeing them freed brought a faint smile to Deniz's face, but she could feel her strength completely leaving her. Her friends approached her with gratitude in their eyes. Selen asked, "Deniz, why did you do this?" Deniz replied with a weak smile, "You're safe now. That's all that matters," and collapsed to the ground. She had sacrificed herself for their salvation. The mansion began to tremble violently. As Selen, Arda, and Chem ran to escape, Deniz's body remained by the altar. That night, the mansion completely collapsed. The villagers later reported hearing a loud sound coming from the site where the mansion had stood. The next morning, the villagers found Selen, Arda, and Chem unconscious in the forest. The three kept murmuring Deniz's name, but couldn't remember what had happened to her. No trace of Deniz was found in the ruins of the mansion. After returning to the village, Selen often felt as though she could hear Deniz's voice. While it seemed the mansion's curse had ended, Selen knew that Deniz's soul was trapped in the darkness. This thought haunted her constantly. Even though the mansion was gone, the villagers claimed to hear a whisper echoing from the forest at night, calling Deniz's name. Her soul remained among the cursed shadows of the mansion. The whispers served as a dark warning. It's not over.